Every day, even if just a little bit, we have to improve. That is the quote hanging above my head while I make this video, though I don't even live like that, I just thought it sounded cool. Deliberate self-reflection and self-betterment are one of the few things we as humans have over animals. Of course, as most aspects of humanity tend to go, this has inevitably become reflected in the stories that we make and tell. To that end, one of the most engaging aspects of storytelling is watching a character who starts from nothing slowly develop into a protagonist who is mountains beyond where they started, whether that be based on maturity, power, or both. Thus, there is a massive responsibility on the author, not just to make this process engaging, but to also make it mean something. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, they do not. There are many different ways to achieve character progress, some of which we'll cover later on in this video. But before that, we need to talk about the most problematic form of training. Enter the brute force training approach, the easiest way to make your character develop without actually putting any actual thought into it. You've seen it before because it's everywhere. Let's say you have a protagonist who you need to be stronger. Why take them through difficult and complicated trials which make them analyze their own abilities, when instead, you could give them a couple of weights and have them do a non-distinct amount of push-ups, and suddenly, bam, just like that, the protagonist is as strong as the plot needs them to be. This is boring. You know this is boring. Everyone knows this is boring. I don't get excited when I see a character doing push-ups or the same move over and over. I get excited when a character's growth is actually being thought through. So why do authors write like this? What can you do instead? And what are some terrible and standout examples of how you actually define your protagonist's progress? Well, in this video, that's what we're going to find out. So stick around, you might just learn something. The basic concept behind the brute force training approach is pretty simple. If you've ever been to the gym before or trained for a sport, you'll understand the concept. The more you do something, the better you get, whether that be lifting weights or running, or I don't know, the more of you subscribe, the bigger the subscriber count will grow, so do that please, subscribe. In the case of fictional power systems, it's typically something like use the same special attack enough and it'll get stronger, or fight enough opponents and you'll just become better at fighting. For a writer, this is a very convenient way of building up a character's progress without actually having to think of any particularly interesting ways to make them improve. You just rinse and repeat. Now, I'm not saying this form of progression is inherently wrong. In fact, almost every single shonen series incorporates it to some capacity. But just like any other trope, there are limits to how much you can actually pull it off before it begins to detract from your writing. And one of the most egregious case studies of this is found in none other than Dragon Ball, the series that arguably made this form of linear progression popular in the first place. Let's do an exercise. Let's take a fight from the tail end of the series and compare it to a fight from the near beginning. From the most part, the only notable difference you'll find is the current color of Goku's hair and his invisible power level. This is because progression in Dragon Ball follows the exact same cycle of train for a while, get beat up by the current antagonist, get stronger, then power up and win. Goku rarely has to contemplate ways of defeating his opponents. He simply has to train under tougher and tougher conditions, and eventually the problem will be solved. Even outside of just this basic cycle, the repetitiveness of improvement in Dragon Ball is literally baked into the power system itself. Zenkai boosts are massive bursts of power that Saiyans receive after recovering from near-fatal injuries. From a writing perspective, this completely trivializes a massive portion of combat, and is one of the laziest systems I've ever seen implemented into a power system. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, but Goku could literally keep throwing himself at a problem, change nothing about his strategy, and as long as he's able to recover, he will eventually become strong enough to beat them through just losing. And it's not like Goku never learns new techniques. Instant Transmission, Kaioken, Ultra Instinct, these are all non-linear ways in which Goku was able to progress in strength that massively changed how he fought his opponents. But moments like these are so rare that for the vast majority of the series, all you're left with is brute force problem solving. If Goku grew like that more often, learning new techniques or using pre-existing techniques in more strategic ways, the narrative behind his fights would be so much more interesting. But instead, 99% of the time, he simply gets to do the same thing over and over again until the problem is out of his way. So, how are you meant to progress your characters? Well, outside of the brute force approach, I believe there are two other, better ways to bolster a character's growth in a battle narrative, which both require the slightest bits of actual effort. Let's start with the evolutionary approach. The evolutionary approach to power progression is all about unlocking new abilities that naturally extend from a character's core skill set. Instead of relying on simple stat increases, this method treats a character's growth like a skill tree, branching outwards in response to new challenges, environments, and opponents. Each new ability isn't necessarily stronger, it's contextual, unlocked because the situation demanded it. The result is a character whose power set feels like a reflection of their journey, rather than a flat reward for going through a training arc. A perfect example of this is Isagi Yoichi from Blue Lock. At the start of the series, Isagi has two clear weapons, spatial awareness and his direct shot. But as the story goes on, Isagi is constantly thrown into situations where these base tools aren't enough. While there are points in the story where Isagi will get better through the brute force approach, like when he spams shots against the robot goalkeeper, this is never the focus. His rapid evolution is. When he notices his reliance on his right leg, he learns to shoot with his left, before evolving further to combine this with a feint, making the two-gun volley. When he realizes his spatial awareness isn't enough, he evolves it further into metavision, the ability to read the entire field using peripheral vision and mental processing, before further evolving it to predict the future of the field itself. These are not random power-ups, they're natural extensions of what he already had, grown out of necessity, shaped by experience, and rooted in his character. The best part of all of this is that Isagi doesn't abandon any of his old skills like some other series would do. He layers them. Every new evolution builds up on the last, and it's quite obvious to see why this is a far more interesting approach than just watching him learn to kick stronger or run faster. Then we have the tactical approach. The tactical approach to character progression doesn't involve unlocking new powers or transformations. Instead, its sole focus is on deepening the character's mastery of what they already have, refining their timing, improving their strategies, and discovering smarter, more inventive ways to apply their pre-existing abilities. While the evolutionary approach is about getting new tools, the tactical approach is about learning to use old tools better. One great example of this is that of Megumi Fushiguro from Jujutsu Kaisen. Megumi starts off the series admittedly a bit of a weakling. Nameless cursed spirits are giving him trouble, and you can generally tell that he isn't actually all that. His cursed energy output is mid-tier, and he's lacking in physical strength compared to characters like Yuji or Todo. However, where Megumi lacks in sheer brute strength, he more than makes up for in versatility. Megumi's ability works because it is inherently modular. The same ability can play offense, defense, or utility depending on Megumi's creativity, and we get to see him find some working strategies, then repeatedly apply and improve upon them in new situations. For example, Megumi learns how to deactivate his Shikigami right before his enemies as an effective version of a feint. He learns to use Max Elephant not just to hose down his enemies, but also to crush them. He learns to use his Toad's grappling abilities not just to ensnare people, but also to pull him out of danger. All of these strategies are like chest openings, and while Megumi's cursed energy output and such does presumably grow throughout the series, this is never the main focus for his improvement. His increasing ability to strategize is. Want another example? Well, there's Jolene Kujo, another character who grows not by refining their strength, but by refining their strategy. Stone Free is an incredibly simple ability on paper. The user can unravel their body into string and use this to fight at mid-range. But throughout Stone Ocean, Jolene manages to take this ability and massively increase its utility. Whether it be reforming herself with string to be bulletproof, using it to stitch up her own wounds, deploying a net to detect movement, or some even more insane stuff. Wow, Jolene's core ability never actually changes or evolves. All that does is her capability to use it. This form of progression is much more involved and thought through than just say letting her make longer and more durable string, which is what you'd end up with if you went down the brute force approach, an improvement with very little substance. So, what's the point I'm trying to make here? Well, for starters, I am by no means saying that you shouldn't indulge in some linear progression in your writing every now and again. Most stories don't need their characters to unlock a new ability or a new way to use pre-existing abilities each fight, and to be honest, it can be just as satisfying to see them improve through sheer dedication and hard work as it can to see them improve through new strategies or abilities. But the problem begins when that's all you ever rely on. Characters should only be able to go so far through basic repetitive training. A good story will have a little bit of brute force, but lean much more heavily on the evolutionary and tactical approach. So add a little spice here and there. Let your characters grow through some self-reflection, and both your audience's interest and your story's narrative will massively benefit. Because life is hardly ever a straight line, and as a storyteller, your stories need to reflect that. Okay, that's it from me. Got any favorite cases of character progression you'd love to talk about? Well, leave them in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed, remember to leave a like, a subscribe, and with that, I bid you adieu. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.